Okay. All right. So thanks everybody for joining us today. It's Wednesday. Excuse me while I just try and collect my thoughts. We are having our monthly CISMA webinar. We've got a great turnout so far, and we always have a few more people hop on in these first few minutes. But we're going to jump right into our presentation today. So we have with us Dr. James Leary. He's a somewhat recent addition to University of Florida IFAS, housed in the Center of Aquatic Invasive Plants. And I actually know James from my time in Hawaii, where he was a pretty well-known guy for his work on innovative strategies to delivering herbicide to invasive plants. So if you're familiar with the terrain in Hawaii, they do a lot of heliops over there. They need helicopters to get to the places where some of the plants are. And so Dr. Leary spearhead a paintball gun delivery of herbicide
Right.
to Myconia in the Hawaiian Islands. So that was really interesting work he was doing out here, and it's
Yeah.
really great to have him here in Florida, looking at some of our kind of challenges we have and bringing that innovation to Florida's issues. So today he's going to talk about mechanical harvesting of aquatic invasive plants. So this research came out of the aquatic plant treatment pause and looking at what all the different opportunities we have to manage invasive plants in Florida is. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to James and let him take over and share this this recent project with us.
Great. Thanks, Emily. I really appreciate the opportunity, the venue you've created through the CISMAs. I'm hearing all those pings, so we got a good crowd today. I know you're all clapping and cheering in the background. I can hear it in my head. Otherwise, though, I'm certain if I tell really dumb jokes, they're still really funny. Anyways, I'm really excited to be here, and I'm going to share with you guys, my program starting out. So as Emily indicated, I'm new to Florida. I've been here for about 18 months, but I'm starting to age now in many ways. Learning a lot. I'm learning more than I'm teaching, that's for sure. Coming from Hawaii, I always felt like it was a strong fit, with the subtropical weed control and my experiences in invasive plant management, but really being relegated to terrestrial environments. And then I get to Florida, and now we're dealing with aquatic systems, and it's been mind-blowing to say the least, working from two-dimensional terrains to now 3 dimensions with volumes and water and what to do. And of course, so I started in February 2019. That was my first day was February 1st. That was also the day that FWC decided to call a moratorium on all herbicide applications. And at that moment, my heart sank. I'm like, oh my God, what have I gotten into? It was a shocker, to say the least. And so I sat back, grabbed the popcorn. I watched the action for the next 4 months with the public listening sessions. Fishermen, duck hunters, applicators, they all came out to voice their opinions on about how we should manage aquatic plants. I'm thinking, these guys are serious. There's a lot of people that are concerned about what's going on. And, I have no opinion to this because I just don't have any familiarity with what's going on. But man, the passion was real. People on both sides were trying to establish their positions on why we're doing it the right way, why you're doing it the wrong way. The story. Everyone knows it, and it's something we take seriously. So FWC took it seriously, and they listened. And when they did, they established, a new mentality and a new program to enhance their aquatic plant management program. And as a public servant with the University of Florida, I felt obligated to assist in any way I could through research and development of new science. And so this is what I offer to you guys, is what I know about mechanical harvesting as a complement to aquatic plant management programs. And it's really just trying to update you on this. Some of you have seen a big portion of this before. I've presented out before, but I've updated it with new technologies and new data. So I hope I don't put you to sleep too late or too early. I do want to acknowledge my co-authors or co-contributors on this. There's others, but the main ones are Andrew Howell and Rob Richardson of NC State. their technical support and their intellectual contributions to this work. Also, Ed Harris and Alex Dew, also with the FWC, the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, have been integral contributors as well, intellectually and technologically, especially with Alex. If you know him, he's extremely bright and very innovative. I like to wear the innovation hat, but I think I pass it to him in terms of what his capabilities are and what he's really brought to the table. So we'll be able to highlight some of his ideas and technologies into that. So without further ado, the title of my talk is Operational Performance of Hydrilla Harvesting on Lake Tohopekaliga. Oh, I need to click to assume authority. Moving forward. Okay, so managing invasive plants. Since 2008, the FWC has had a statutory mandate to manage invasive plants in Florida's public waters. That is 1.25 million acres of managed area. That's an amazing amount of real estate. Immediately in my mind thinking, Florida is more than just a tourist destination with lots of urban sprawl. There really is a lot of areas worth conserving. There is an abundance of natural resources. And I think we need to always start with recognizing that in this day and age, fresh water is gold, and it's going to surpass oil in terms of its value really fast. And so Florida in the future is going to be extremely important to national security and really starting with its abundance of this natural resource. And so for us as aquatic plant managers, really recognizing the value of water as a resource to start out with. And that's a bit soapboxy and maybe it's a bit opinionated, but at the very least, I want to establish its importance and the impact that we have on a critical resource nationally and within the state of Florida. So anyways, steering back into what we're talking about, FWC, they need to manage invasive plants. Otherwise, it's going to have negative impacts on these freshwater resources. And strategically, what's been developed over the decades through dedicated individuals and personnel has been a concept of maintenance control, which is a coordinated effort to maintain low levels of populations in order to mitigate the risks that come with allowing for invasive plant populations to grow unchecked, develop into infestations, and permanently modifying landscapes and ecosystems. So maintenance control is a concept where you can never let your foot off the gas. You're always constantly managing the situation, but if you're doing it right, you're using the least amount of herbicide, the most economical approach, and so that's the kind of the concept and of course the philosophy. The goals of maintenance control: minimizing environmental damage caused by invasive plants, conserving the use and functions of public waters. That's a critical feature. We won't get too much into it, but we understand recreation. I've already highlighted my personal interest in protecting our potable water sources. And of course, critical habitat to an abundance of unique biota that only exist in Florida: birds, fish, and amphibians, reptiles, and mammals. We need to enhance the conditions for diverse native plant growth. We can't just let one plant do everything for us. It doesn't work that way. Plants need to work in communities that are diversified and with functions and structure. Part of maintenance control is keeping the invasive species in check. When you keep them in check, you're maintaining small populations. You're spending more energy looking for plants than treating infestations. And so that allows us to minimize the use of herbicides required to get the job done. And of course, herbicides equals money. We can reduce our costs by maintaining and optimizing management plans to keep these invasive species in check. And then, of course, adapting management according to the current conditions in each water body. That's a feature that I'm realizing. So we're talking about across the over 1 million acres of lake public waters, we have over 3,000 lakes. Every lake is different from the other. There's no lake that matches the other. And so that also inherently suggests that every lake has a different problem requiring a different solution. And so that just makes it complicated. It just means life is hard when you're dealing with aquatic plants. So Hydrilla is the elephant in the room. It is the #1 invasive species in aquatic systems in Florida. We're talking about the dioecious form, whereas the rest of the country deals with monoecious, we deal with the dioecious. What would otherwise think to be a benefit is that it doesn't have the male partner to pollinate and to reproduce propagules, but unfortunately the female type that does exist does just well with propagating vegetatively through tuber formation, turions, and of course fragmentation and rooting. It does not have a problem producing propagules, and it doesn't need men, so it does just fine. It lives in a subtropical environment. Florida is a very attractive place for people, and it's also an attractive place for plants, and it does very well, and in fact can grow year-round. And so when we think about management strategies from January to December, there are opportunities to target management for controlling Hydrilla, theoretically. Realistically, there are a lot of impediments to Hydrilla control, namely lake uses, recreation, hunting, fishing tournaments. These all impact our ability to get on the lake and to properly manage Hydrilla when it's best suited. And so we have to work around these other use patterns, and these lakes are very popular. In particular, the one we're talking about, Lake Toho, is extremely popular with fishermen and recreationalists. So typically management is let me use this graph here. So here we have a graph, and it's very complicated, but we have a bar graph and a line graph. The bar graph shows when management is occurring historically over the last decade with FWC. And you can see where it spikes from February to April and November to December. This is when they typically are conducting a majority of their management. Well over 60% of their effort is during the early spring and late fall. What you also see is line figures where you have the dark black line showing when Hydrilla is growth, so it's obviously peaking during the summer months. This is when we would not manage, because we're talking about the growth rates are so excessive that it's difficult to impose management to suppress that. That's why you would hit it early in the spring to suppress any kind of extensive summer growth. Also notice when tubers are being formed. They're forming in late fall and early spring. And so there's 2 seasons when tuber formation is occurring, and you'll notice that is when we try to target management to suppress tuber formation. So this is strategically very intelligent, using the best science available, understanding the biology of the target species, a very thoughtful process. And otherwise, hard to argue. I mean, it's very defendable in terms of how they do it. There's other factors too. The herbicides being used are sensitive to degradation during the summer months, high temperatures. Also, if you were to treat large infestations during the summer months, this could result in a dissolved oxygen crash. That is has a negative consequence socially and biologically, of course. And so we try to stay away from that. I say we, meaning the FWC as the practitioners responsible for it. But I feel like I'm a partner in trying to understand the science and help with the management. Anyway, so these are some of the caveats to what has gone into the development of the current strategy in place. A very well developed program. It's really hard to argue with. Very defendable. Obviously, there's always room for improvement. That's why we're here today. So managing Hydrilla on a large lake. Let's take Lake Toho as an example. It's over 18,000 acres. It has the largest Hydrilla infestation in Florida. Annually, over 3,500 acres are managed just to maintain 50% coverage. So this is pretty interesting. So we have a graph here that goes way back to 1983. to current. And so the Invasive Plant Management Program, previously Department of Environmental Protection, now FWC, has monitored the presence absence of hydrilla and other species over the decades. So here we have a quarter century of information where it shows back in 1983, hydrilla was barely a problem, hardly identified. This is speaking to people who understand invasive species, early detection, lag phase, the invasion curve where it reaches exponential growth rates, and then it reaches carrying capacity when it's infested and too late. So this is classic invasion curve biology and our understanding of invasive species. So back in the early 80s, hydrilla was just in the lag phase, barely even recognized as a problem then. I mean, prior to that, it was introduced to Florida in the late 60s, early 70s. So we're talking about a decade later, it finally was detected. Then by the early 90s, we see dramatic growth response of hydrilla, all the way up to 75% of the lake occupied by hydrilla. Explosive. I mean, this is an amazing occurrence. This is what I like to call from mid-90s to early 2000. This is what I like to call the Floridone epic. So Floridone is a herbicide. It's a systemic contact herbicide that is known to be highly effective on hydrilla at low concentrations. And it's also a whole lake treatment generally because it's a polar substance, so it moves and dissipates in the water column. It has long residency, but it required up to 90 days of maintaining concentration to get effective control. But the good part was because you were using such low rates in the parts per billion that you could selectively control hydrilla and protect the other native species in that water column. So it was really a magic bullet in its day. And you can see when Floridone was applied, it would crash from 75% down to almost nothing. And then, of course, it would recover. And then it crashed again. And right at that second crash was when they started to notice, like, when we used Floridone last time, we used the same rates. Did you check the numbers? Yeah, okay. Well, somehow it's just not working as well. Sure enough, scientists had determined that resistance was developing. And it's like, uh-oh, what are we going to do? So Floridone's out of the picture because it still works, but now you got to crank the concentrations up. And by the way, this is when it starts to affect the other plant species. So for another talk, and someone can tell it much better, but the history of Floridone use and the development of resistance is really quite fascinating and obviously unfortunate. But it is there is a take-home message on the value of herbicides that we have in our toolbox and how you have to protect them against these types of situations. And so exactly the case with Floridone and hydrilla. This is when we then switched to endethol. Prior to Floridone, we knew endethol worked really well. I mean, this herbicide was developed in the 50s and has been registered as an aquatic herbicide since the 70s. So we're talking about something that we knew about, but otherwise was not considered large-scale treatments. It was more small-scale, but we were limited on options. And so Mike Netherland and others developed a program to facilitate or to develop endethol as a large-scale treatment. And sure enough, this is currently what we use today. And in my personal experience, is highly effective, does an excellent job on controlling hydrilla. But now you're using more caution because it is also can target other species. So you have to, it's not quite like Floridone. You have to control hydrilla in patches. And so today we're managing on Lake Tahoe alone over 3,500 acres. Anyways, I talked this graph to death, and then we have a table here. This is the budget and treatment program for FWC in 2018. And what we see out of the $17 million that went into aquatic plant management, over 10 million went to hydrilla. Following close behind was floating plants. Everything else drops off. You're talking about the three biggies. You're talking about hydrilla, hyacinth, and water lettuce. But hydrilla is ranked number one. The expenditures are mostly because you're talking about in-water treatments, and so you got to maintain concentrations, which uses more herbicide than targeting floating plants with foliar treatments. Again, another story, but budgetarily, Hydrilla dominates in FWC's commitments. I don't need to talk too much about this because I talked a lot about it, but it definitely describes fluoridone resistance. This is a table from Netherland and Jones in 2015, where you can see on Lake Tohopekaliga, 1993, they started to get comfortable with it, with fluoridone in 500 pounds. And then they moved it up to over 3,000 pounds. And then in 2002, 5,000 pounds, 6,000 pounds. This is when they started to realize, like, man, we keep adding more and more, and it's just not doing the same, until finally from 2005, 2012, they just stopped using it altogether. Really short turnaround. They had a very small window to make fluoridone work. So standards in hydrilla management, treatments provide up to 300 days of suppression. That's the ideal. Currently and previously, so previously we were much reliant on fluoridone, over-reliant on fluoridone. Today, we are disproportionately reliant on endethol. Here you see aquathol K, up to 60% of the total herbicide use patterns for hydrilla. So again, I don't mean to call anyone out, but we're potentially repeating history in terms of our use patterns, where we find something that works and we use it until it doesn't work anymore. So this is a problem, and it's a problem that has multiple solutions that we're currently working towards, but we certainly understand that today we really like endethol, but if history repeats itself someday, we're going to miss it. Okay, kind of circling back, so obviously there's a need for enhancement of our herbicide program by diversifying our portfolio, identifying new active ingredients that have different modes of action so that we can complement that. Also, other mechanisms, physical and mechanical, that can facilitate and complement herbicide uses so that we can reduce the use of herbicide or accentuate it with other forms of management. This also coincides again with back in February 2019, when there was a moratorium on herbicides because of the public outcry about the over-reliance on herbicides. And so this resulted in public listening sessions and the development of what is called the Plant Management Program Enhancement Plan. And this was developed starting in January 2019. Based on public feedback, the FWC is improving aquatic plant management by several features. One of them that I'm highlighting that I want to talk about today is increasing the use of mechanical harvesting to manage aquatic plants. This is something that people are familiar with. Mechanical harvesting goes back several decades, so it's a 100-year-old technology in Florida. People are familiar with it. They like the immediate results you get from it. But ultimately, FWC and aquatic plant managers have always understood that harvesting has limitations. It is generally known to not outperform herbicide treatments. Herbicide treatments provide up to 300 days of management. There is no evidence that mechanical harvesting has provided this before. But again, so now we have this conflict between public perceptions about what works and what doesn't work, and practitioners who are intimately familiar with management of aquatic plants. These are conflicting, and this is ongoing, and this is something we work towards in trying to come to a consensus or some sort of agreement on understanding what each party understands or desires, and using science, in my case, to facilitate the outcomes of how we would move forward with this. So I come in with an open mind, an objective on how do we make mechanical harvesting work. So I was charged to re-examine mechanical harvesting for hydrilla management. Talked about mechanical harvesters being a century-old technology, benefits of a lake system by removing biomass from the water column, unlike a herbicide treatment where it decomposes and remains in the water column. So far, historically, it's mostly deployed in tussock removal projects. Tussocks are floating islands that are vegetated, generally have a thick muck layer, so there's a lot going on there. Anyway, so it's mostly for tussock removal, but not generally regarded as a superior option in other forms of aquatic plant management. Project mission funded by the FWC was to update mechanical harvesting with technology upgrades for better precision and accounting. And the objective is to develop operational performance metrics on mechanical harvesting of hydrilla. We designed an experiment on Lake Toho with three heavily infested 100-acre plots that were harvested over a 2-month period from June to August 2019. You should see a red flag immediately, June from August. So that's like those red X's on the calendar that says, you know what, managing hydrilla in the summer comes with risk. It's very difficult to manage, and there are caveats to that. So just, heading you off at the pass. So there's 3 plots established, one in the north. You see this long section here. Each were approximately 100 acres. 45 hectares on the south end, 2 square plots, and 64 hectares on the north plot, a long rectangular stretch. 6 kelp and harvesters, 80-foot long aluminum frames with pontoons and carrying capacity of 800 cubic feet, hence the Kelpin 800. The harvester is the kind of a conventional standard with a conveyor belt on the front that articulates hydraulically so that you can drop it below the water column. It could reach depths of up to 5 feet. And then in front of that conveyor is a sickle bar on the uprights and on the sides so that you could cut through and then bring materials up on the conveyor and push it into the hopper that holds capacity. Once that's full, then that harvester turns around and then deposits it either on a barge or on a spoil island or shoreline. In this case, for this project, they deployed barges, so it kept the ferry time between the harvest operation and the offloading close to minimize the amount of time spent. Harvesters were deployed in June of 2019 and ended at the end of August for a total of 77 days recorded. We used GPS trackers on the harvester, so when that harvester was turning on, it was recording every 10 seconds. This was extremely valuable data. I collected well over 1 million points on these 6 harvesters. And these points had spatial locations, spatial reference points, and timestamps, so I could calculate effort served per unit of area. This was critical in analyzing efficiency and precision of these harvest operations. We also follow behind with survey operations with acoustics using fathometers or fish finders, and then used the ScanLog2 format data that was collected and had it sent to Biobase, a cloud service that can convert that information into biovolume or plant height. So it's basically sonar measuring plants and the water column. A lot of you are very familiar with this, and some of you may not, but it was new to me, and it's extremely useful information to be deployed in geographical information system software. We also are using satellite remote sensing. There's the European Space Agency launched Sentinel-2 satellite constellations. I want to say this was back in 2014. It's been online since 2015. This is free to the public globally, so it's an extremely valuable resource. This creates 10-meter resolution satellite images with 13 bands of information, so it's multispectral. The reason why that's important, not to get too technical, but multispectral bands allow us to capture the red and near infrared bands that allows us to calculate what's called normalized difference vegetation index. In other words, it tells us how green the plants are. It tells us where green plants are, and on the water system, this is pretty valuable because it shows off very nicely in contrast to the water column. So now you're probably wondering, like, yeah, but hydrilla is underwater, so does that work? Yes and no. I'm going to highlight yes, why it does, but there are limitations. But mainly think about it this way. When hydrilla is topped out on the water surface, that satellite picks it up. And so satellites are allowing us to monitor in almost in real time the the frequency is about 5 to 7 days, we can monitor not only the harvest project that I'm reporting on, but all the other management treatments. And this is one of my encouragements to you guys is, if this is something we could all become very familiar with and benefit from. And so that's kind of one of my take-home messages. Anyways, moving forward. Okay, let's start coming into some of the results here. So for harvest efficiency, you can see the raster map of the harvester effort, time per unit area, and you can kind of see how they operated in the different plots. We recorded over almost 1,500 hours of harvester time in that 77-day period. You can see there's a graph here that's, again, a little bit busy. I tried to pack it all in. You have this black line that shows, so on the x-axis is the timeline of a normal day from 0 to 24 hours. And on the y-axis, we have meters per second, so we have a speed value. And then here we have accumulated hours. So this black line is the average speed over the time of day. And so you can see, starting at about 7 o'clock, speed ramps up on these harvesters and then holds at about 0.7 meters per second, and then shuts down at about 8 or 9 o'clock at night. So this was a normal working day for these harvesters during this time period. You can see while they were peak operation at about 0.7 acres. We also collected a lot of speed values where it was recording 0. And that is when they would be idling. And there's a lot of reasons why they'd be idling. They'd be idling because they're turned off, done for the day. That would be mostly here and here, at 6 o'clock in the morning and 9 o'clock at night. And then you have idling because they may be offloading material onto the barge. They may have mechanical issues and they're shutting down. But you can see the idling in this gray area here, first of all, represents about 30% of the total time that was accumulated. So that's a lot of time when this thing is not operating. But it's mostly in the morning and the evening hours when they're starting up and shutting down. But again, you have idling throughout the day, again, for the reasons stated. And then you have the operations time when they're actually harvesting. So here is that little bump here. So this is on the x-axis speed values. You got this bump here. So harvesting was somewhere between 0.4 and 1.1 meters per second. That's when they were normal operating, and that's when they were harvesting. Beyond that is when they were ferrying, so they would get up to speeds of 3 meters per second. That's moving, man. So again, you can kind of break down based on speed values what they were doing. They were either idling for several reasons, they were harvesting, actively harvesting, or they were in ferrying. And ferrying was inconsequential here again because they had barges. There wasn't a lot of movement back and forth in that regard. Harvesting was, idling was over 30% of the time, and then the remainder of it was actively harvesting. You can see throughout the day they were actually harvesting, mainly from 9 o'clock in the evening, in the morning till about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. During summer months, not uncommon to be pushed off the lake with a thunderstorm rolling in. So pretty truncated time when you could be actively harvesting. We have pretty good profile here of what that occurrence was like. So I think I spent enough time on this slide. Moving forward. So let's look at some of the efficacy. These are heat maps of the hydroacoustics. So think of biovolume as the proportion of the plant height versus the water column depth. And so the hotter it is, the closer the the plants are to the surface, and so that would be translated in a proportion of 0 to 1 for biovolume. You can see in July, which is about 3 weeks after harvesting started, this is when we first got out there to monitor. We missed the opportunity to catch before it for various reasons. You can see in the north plot, you got the red's hot, so there's still quite a bit of hydrilla in those plots. And then in August, we're about 1 month left. It's getting hotter and hotter at the end. So, I mean, there's still a lot of hydrilla in that water column when they were done harvesting. And then 1 month later, super hot. It's still a lot of growth after August. So hydrilla really showed how much it grows from September through all the way up into November. Similarly, for the south plots, 2 and 1, you can see where harvesting was catching up on it, went from hot to cooler in August, and then this was as good as it got in August 29th, here and here. Just focus on both of these. And as soon as we let our foot off the gas, this is when the party was over, no more harvesting. It reverted back to really strong presence in the water column, especially in the south 2 plot. So, I mean, it really demonstrated that mechanical harvesting is a sublethal management effort. It literally is cutting grass. You cut it, it's going to regrow from that, and Hydrilla has that capability. If you're in 7 feet of water and you can only get 5 feet down, you're leaving 2 foot of material that's rooted at the bottom. So inherently, it's going to reestablish. So we're talking about, in a maintenance control strategy, think about mechanical harvesting and the frequency that you'd have to be going back to that site to keep going. So, you know, you think about from June until August, there was 6 or 7 times that they went into this area to cut it out. I didn't do a good job of explaining that. I showed you the total hours, but this wasn't just a one cut and then we're done. This was several cuts in a 77-day period. So you can see that it's constant just to keep it in check. And then once you let your foot off the gas and you're out, Hydrilla just makes you look silly. And again, caveat to that is like, this is what happens when you try to manage Hydrilla at peak summer. I mean, and it's very, very difficult. This gives a little more perspective with bar graphs. Here we have 3 bar graphs, again, south plots and north plots. What you can see is on the blue, these are box plots. And what you can see is the blue boxes representing, just focus on the middle of the boxes. That's the median value. And then you have their interquartile ranges. And I'm not going to go into that. But anyways, it encompasses most of the profile here. But the blue represents the depth of the water, and the green represents the height of the plant. So you can visualize, you know, green being below blue. And this is going from June until September. Sorry, it's a little bit small font, so I'm going to walk you through this. You can see during this time period when they're harvesting, actually did a pretty good job of reducing the plant height from June, July into August. And again, peak performance at the end of the harvest. This is as good as it gets. And as soon as the harvest is complete, you can see how plant heights are encroaching and moving closer to the water surface. That's one plot. And then you got South 2, where we struggled to keep the plant heights below the water surface, but still showed peak performance in early August, but then it just got away from us. And then here you can see how the plant height is overlapping with the water depth. And so clearly that designates as a topped out situation. North plots, you should note how the elevation is lower, the depth is much lower. This is a shallow area. You can see where just throughout the entire time, it was difficult to manage and maintain Hydrilla, keeping it below the water surface. It couldn't keep up with it. In this case, growth of Hydrilla was outpacing the harvesting rates that were being measured in these plots. And again, highlighting the fact that this is from June until August. Red X, red X, red X, historically and traditionally, this is not when we would be managing Hydrilla, but we did throw these mechanical harvesters into the gauntlet. They made a valiant effort, and in some cases demonstrated how you could do it. We won't talk about cost today, but let's just say that it costs. Now let's move into some of the satellite data and for a little more visual perspective. So here we have 4 sets of satellite images, screen captures. You can see the north plot on August 22nd. This is the last day of harvest. You can see the rectangular piece cut out. Looks fabulous. I mean, it's very noticeable from space. Now let's move to October 11th, literally 40 days after treatment. And you can see all this green fuzz, all this Hydrilla filling right back in. So you bought about 40 days of suppression with a mechanical harvesting as a sublethal suppressant. Now let's move to south, same day, August 22nd, last day of harvest. You can see the square plots here and here. And then we move into November 20th, about 3 months after, about 90 days after. And you can see the South 2 plot filling in. And then you see South Plot 1 is not even noticeable. This boat trail right here, I think, was treated with herbicide. So that basically confounded this. I call it integrated pest management. Looks great, man. You use herbicide and mechanical harvest together, looks fabulous. Anyways, moving on. But again, using satellites to monitor the progress beyond the life of this project is really, for me, has paid dividends in terms of looking at the term of suppression that this technique offers. And then, so taking that satellite information and calculating the NDVI, which I talked about, this gives a little bit of perspective. Again, similarly, red is hot. So you can see in June, actually it looks pretty good. This looks like herbicide treatment probably in the springtime. And then we start to harvest. You can start to see the contrast between cut and uncut. You can see where we're cutting in August. September, post-harvest, you can start to see things filling in. September, looking bad. Oh, it looks horrible in October. October 31st starts to kind of fade out. I think there was another herbicide treatment, by the way. So just look at October 11th. You can see it just filled right in. Similar with South Plots, really distinguishable. You can really pick out where harvesting had removed the vegetation. And then finally, post-harvest fills back in. Anyways, we can accurately calculate not only biovolume with the acoustics, but percent area cover of topped out hydrilla. So there's an opportunity to really quantify what the conditions are pre and post harvest. Again, similarly with this technology, the use of satellites, you can do this also with herbicides, by the way, for another talk. And this is kind of wrapping up what those pictures have described. Again, another box plot. In this case, you got the green representing the harvest plots and the blue representing the buffer zone outside of that harvest plot. And so what you'll see is, taking South 1 as an example, at the start in early May or late May, you can see that there was no distinction between the buffer outside and inside the treatment, obviously, because there was no harvesting. As we start to harvest, you can see a drop. You can start to see, whoops, backing up, you can start to see a separation between the buffer and the harvested plots. You can definitely measure a difference between the harvest plot and the unharvested to demonstrate the efficacy of harvesting, a relative term, obviously, using an NDVI scale, which is not a quantification of biomass, mind you, but of greenness. And so we can reduce greenness, with harvesting. And in similar fashion to the acoustics, this really corresponds nicely with the acoustics for both the south and north plots. You can see when harvesting is taking place from June until August, we're at this dash line. You can see how we can separate the harvest plot from the unharvested plots. As soon as you let your foot off the gas, now these NDVIs start to blend in all the way out into November. And so that's, again, it corresponds really nicely with the acoustics and offers a different layer of remote sensing to monitor this situation. Okay, so what does this all mean in terms of how would we deploy this kind of information? So let's pretend that herbicides are unavailable to a maintenance control program, and now we need to rely on mechanical harvesting to subsidize the maintenance control that's being conducted on Lake Toho, which again is about 3,500 acres. Well, herbicide treatments cost anywhere from $400 to $1,000 an acre. Quoted mechanical harvesting can be 2 to 3 times that at over $1,900 per acre or $1,400 per hour. Previously, I don't think I highlighted well enough, but these harvesters are harvesting at about 1.5 acres per hour. So you can do the math on that. And then, so summer growth from June to November, that's 183 days of hydrilla growth. So this is our window of trying to suppress hydrilla from the situation. Each acre would require, according to the data presented here, I'm kind of heading you off the pass on this, but each acre would require about 5 to 9 boat hours for complete summer maintenance. This depends on a lot of factors: how fast the boat's moving, how fast the hydrilla is growing. But this is a ballpark between 5 to 9 boat hours at $1,900 or $1,400 per hour. It would take 17 to 30,000 boat hours to manage 3,500 acres on Lake Toho. According to the numbers on efficiency, one boat can manage about 168 acres in that time period. Lake Tahoe maintenance would require a fleet of approximately 21 Kelpin 800s 6 months out of the year, just to maintain the Hydrilla under its current maintenance control strategy. I don't think there's 21 Kelpins on planet Earth. So there's a feasibility issue that we have to deal with in terms of, if we're committing to mechanical harvesting, there's going to be some infrastructure that goes into supporting this endeavor. And so it's not like we'll just start harvesting everything. It's much more complicated than that. We're not prepared to do that if we were to all of a sudden disregard or shut down the use of herbicides. And so these are reality checks that we have to be careful with. We have to make sure that we're smart in how we progress towards more integrated approaches that would incorporate mechanical harvesting. I think there's a fit, but we need to be smart about it. We need to allow the industry to grow into it. Okay, that's all I had, actually. So we're into the question phase. I probably went 30 minutes over and everyone went home already. But anyways, I really appreciate the opportunity. Emily, thank you very much for setting this venue up, and I appreciate the audience for showing up today. This is great.
No, you were right on time. So
Fabulous.
did perfect. Do we have any questions? Let's open it up. If anyone, you can type in the chat box. You're also welcome at this point to unmute. I'll give folks a few minutes. We did have one question come in early on as to who had statutory authority prior to 2008, and I think you followed up and answered that with it switched from DEP to FWC at that time. Is that correct?
That's my understanding. Other people would have more institutional knowledge on that, and it apparently didn't come without controversy. So. Aquatic plant management is a stepchild in the state institutional, volleyball match.
Absolutely. All right. So, any questions? I tend to take silence at the end of a presentation as a very thorough and well done job by the presenter.
Me too.
And you can always reach out to James. So his contact information is here, and there. James, what's next for this type of research? Where are you guys going from here?
It's a good call. So I think where we're at, to my understanding, is obviously in my world, we're setting up for publication on this. So there's a lot of rigor in that. That's less fun than just presenting on the highlights. But in terms of where this goes with the enhancement plan and how they move forward with it, to my understanding, I think where we're comfortable with, or where we're at now, is it's very difficult to justify how you use mechanical harvesters for hydrilla management as a standalone. It was very costly, so that's one of the issues. I think where it's been moving now is FWC and the Water Management, South Florida Water Management District, the Army Corps of Engineers have really started to focus in on how mechanical harvesting can facilitate floating plant management in the Kissimmee chain of lakes, and especially in Lake Okeechobee. I think that what I presented today would be totally irrelevant and not applicable to anything that goes into how you would use mechanical harvesting on floating plants. A different plant type, different equipment. It's and much greater challenges. To me, so far, what I see with floating plants is you're really not managing plants, you're managing animals. Those things move all over the place and they're hard to control. So very difficult. And so I think it has a fit. I think they can figure it out. This is not their first rodeo. They will find out that it's fairly costly. There is some discussions about how to make mechanical harvesting fit in aquatic plant management and have it coincide with nutrient management. Obviously, plants have nutrients, and can we benefit from nutrient removal as a component of aquatic plant management? That deserves a debate where you can pick your side and have a lot of defendable material to offer why it would work and why it wouldn't work. So that's another fight that will happen as well. So nutrient management is an angle. Floating plants is definitely an area that are being focused on. Looks like we might have some more questions coming in, Emily. I'm not sure.
Yeah, so I don't know if you can see those.
I cannot. I'm sorry.
I can tell you. So you kind of talked about this. Um, so what would your recommendation be based on this research on how to best incorporate mechanical harvesting effectively? And a follow-up to that is, do you feel it was worth the time spent investigating? And are there other potential applications for this mechanical harvesting?
Hmm. Those are tough questions. Some of them are, so anyways, some of my response is going to be soapboxy. I'm trying to be very objective. In many ways, what I presented feels a bit selfish. You know, I learned an amazing amount of information on this that others who've been doing this for a long time are like, yeah, we knew that already. So in some ways, we didn't have to go down this road. Um, Technically, I think we understand mechanical harvesting has limitations and it has fits. You know, we talked about its fit with tussock removal. I think there's going to be a fit with, I think there's a fit with hydrilla management, but it really has to coincide with the combination of balanced herbicide use if the purpose is to suppress and mitigate hydrilla expansion. So that's probably the direction it would go in. Otherwise, if it does prove that vegetation removal is an effective nutrient mitigation strategy, harvesters have a really strong fit. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done to make that point or prove that case, because that's a major commitment. It's a very expensive endeavor. But it's certainly worth exploring. So I would be keen to understand the nutrient management side of things and how that might play a role. But again, it's not free. It's not free to understand that. And I'm a bit conflicted because I certainly empathize with individuals and groups who have a desire to see us use less herbicides. And so this is one of the few options we have to understand. I think my other position on this too is herbicide registrations in aquatic systems can go away tomorrow, and it has nothing to do with the science and what we understand. And so what we need to be cautious with is if herbicides all of a sudden, if we had another moratorium, for instance, or herbicides were to be discontinued in aquatic systems. I'm being fatalistic here, but I'm just being honest. If those were for any reason to be unavailable in aquatic plant management, harvesting is second place, and we better make sure we have something, and we need to have contingencies in place. And so we need to constantly figure out how to make mechanical harvesting a component of the overall comprehension of aquatic plant management. It's nothing else as a contingency. It's not a very strong argument. It's, you know, I could get challenged on that, but I think I just want to make sure we understand philosophically is we want to make sure that we're balancing our aquatic plant management with multiple tools, because it's a very dynamic situation that can change on us in a hurry, and we better be able to respond to that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So last question, and then I just have a few updates for folks. So I want to make sure we end on time. And again, feel free to reach out to James on any of this. But has the results of this study kind of been pushed out to local stakeholders? And if so, how were their reactions to it?
That's another good question. Yes and no. Well, to my understanding, yes, not formally. You know, this is FWC's show in a way, for better or worse. You know, they need to be able to defend their program. Objectively, I've taken a position of, I was assigned to do the research. I'm presenting the research as is, in an honest way. It could be interpreted differently by someone else who did the same research, but I'm trying to present it honestly without forcing someone to make a decision based on the results I've generated. This is a snapshot. Like I said, you're throwing harvesters in midsummer on Lake Toho. Yeah, what do you think you're going to get? We could do the same thing with herbicides to prove how that doesn't work. The easy thing to do in life is to prove how something doesn't work. The hardest thing we can do is to prove how to make it work. You know, and Emily, to your point, back in my days in Hawaii, working on innovation is always dealing with 90% failure and that 10% success. And so we can take that attitude with mechanical harvesting. I think it's limited technologically. I think there's a need for engineering to improve on it. I think we could be thinking about technologies related to automation, precision agriculture. Robots should be driving these boats, not people. These are directions we could go in, but that's a major capital investment, and there needs to be a consensus and commitment to that. So anyways, soapboxy again, but the FWC really needs to defend their position. It's more than just a science. They also have to, there's a social aspect to it. Sometimes you just got to do it because that's what people want. It doesn't matter what the science says. You know, it's not always driven by, hey man, science told you you do it, you're going to do it this way. It counts, I get it. But we need to balance it with a lot of other factors that go into decision making.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for presenting today, and we look forward to hearing more on this. So thank you again. And so for folks on the line, I just have a few updates from the CISMA side. So I did this last month, and I thought I would go ahead and throw this in again this month. Our calls happen to fall on our invasive weed profile Wednesday for our social media. And so essentially what I've been doing is walking through the FLEPC Category 1 list. But this one was actually requested by FWC as one that they are starting to get a lot of questions about, and is becoming more and more of an issue. And I highlighted in this box, and this kind of follows with what James presented about Hydrilla and the lag time, is that this plant has been around since the 1980s and earlier, but it was only in a few waterways in the 80s, and it's now in more than half in 2017. So one that's starting to expand, this Cuban bulrush. It's interesting, if you try to look for information on this plant online, you quickly go down a rabbit hole of taxonomic changes. It's had 3 different name changes. So you'll find information on it under the 3 taxonomic names listed there. But just wanted to kind of highlight this plant. This will be going out today, this afternoon, on our social media as well, as one that FWC, invasive plant management folks, are kind of interested in getting information on and hearing from you if it's an issue in your area. So just wanted to throw that out there. Also on the FWC front, and a lot of you guys hopefully have received this in email form. And actually here I want to throw these links in the chat box for you. But just wanted to be sure, if you haven't already, please take some time to participate in this survey effort from FWC. This is from the wildlife side. They're looking at invasive species rulemaking for reptiles. And also just share this if you have a social media presence through your organization or even just yourself. I threw these links to the survey and the media release in the chat box. The media release has some suggested language for sharing this in social media. So we're really trying to get the word out and help FWC get feedback on this. There's also going to be some virtual workshops scheduled from September 29th through October 10th. And if you click on the survey link and scroll to the bottom, you can find how to participate in the workshops, as well as how to just provide general comment. There's also a general comment period that's open until the end of November. So please help us get the word out and get participation and feedback on that as they go through that process. Lastly, again, via email, I've been trying to put together CEU opportunities and get the word out on those for folks. I know it's been a struggle this year with COVID and a lot of programs having to either be canceled or find other ways. So if you haven't been receiving those emails, be sure to let me know. But this is what I know of that's coming up as far as CEU opportunities in Florida. So a lot going on in October. And if you know of opportunities, or you yourself are hosting an opportunity, definitely share that information with me. I know there's a couple CISMAs who have some programs coming up as well. And so as I get that information, I'll share it with everybody via the update emails that go out. And this has also all been added to our calendar on the FISP site. So if you go to the website and click on our events calendar, all of these, with the exception of the first one, which is a program that is available on your own time, you can find the information to these on our calendar on the website as well. We hope you'll join us next month for our final CISMA call of 2021. As you know, we take November and December off, and we'll be back in January. But I'm really looking forward to hearing more about this. They have been researching this for a number of years now, but there's a novel parasite that came in with Burmese pythons and is now impacting native snakes beyond the range of the python. So I think especially they're finding this in like the dusky pygmy rattler snake. But so they just put out some new research on this through University of Florida and the Croc Ducks group down in South Florida. So Melissa Miller is going to be here with us to talk about that and share what's been going on. So that's really an issue I think a lot of us might want to just have on our radar because the parasite has the potential to impact areas beyond just where the pythons can. So looking forward to that. And then just as a reminder, we're here every month on the fourth Wednesday. Past calls are available online. So you just go to our FIS page and our CISMA calls, you can find a link. Takes about a week to get them up. So if you're looking for this presentation, it'll be up in the next week or so. And then as always, follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and we are putting out original content on almost a weekly basis. So we're hoping that that is beneficial and useful for folks. So we're right at a minute over our promised hour. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today, and looking forward to talking to you again in October. Have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, Emily. Aloha. Thanks, everybody. Take care and stay safe.